I'll go up after I make sure there's no more questions and.
Say, Dave, you talked about our audit going to the state audit. Is that required? Or
Yep.
It is.
It
yep.
goes for review.
It goes for review.
It goes for review, so they don't do any real analytical that I know of anyway. They might look at high level stuff,
Yeah.
year to year changes, but it goes to them for review.
And they keep a repository of them, I think,
Yeah.
so you can go online and look them
Yeah.
up.
Yeah.
We publish all our audits online as well.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we don't hide any of it, it's all there
Yeah.
on the
Yeah.
website, anybody can go look at it.
When you're doing your policy changes, are you gonna take out the whole publishing of the bills
The
because
bills
they're
in
already
detail?
online?
Yeah, I would love to.
Yeah.
Okay,
Am I
thank you.
teaching you out? At the same
No,
board?
I don't like people in my bubble. And Dave tends to like try to sit right next to me.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
Oh, now
with
you just
this
made the mayor think
breakdown
he had
So
of
to-
I
pennies,
just.
I don't wanna be in somebody's bubble.
Right?
Property tax relief would be for any general fund expenditure.
But that's on your list, right?
Uh,
Cause I
There's
really,
all
Economic
still
development,
going to be
obviously.
quite
I
was
really don't know
matching
how I'm
fund
gonna
stuff.
Yep.
do it with the new system.
How
Cause the minutes
are
are done in there.
improvements
Yeah.
in infrastructure different?
Infrastructure is typically like a
Capital improvements.
horizontal, capital improvements, exactly. Capital improvements versus infrastructure, they're slightly different, but
I
there's
think
a
the
lot of overlap.
ordinance language says something like underground
There's-
infrastructure or
I can
street.
probably find it. There's a whole list. It's right in the ordinance.
Okay. Do you have a citation for the ordinance?
It's, I'll look it up here. It's 28 and a half.
28.5.
Yeah.
Okay. So infrastructure is more in the ground. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I'll read it to you. I mean, it's just a nuance. There's some stuff that would probably qualify in either penny.
I'll look at it. I'll be able to process it if you just read it to me.
28 and a half.
What else are we waiting Is there
So
anything else?
improvements,
I think it's
it
signed
says
and stuff.
street systems, sewer systems, water systems, parking, airport, libraries, landfills,
You have
flood
all your
control,
council members and all.
public safety improvements.
Okay.
So that's the improvements section.
But as for-
And then on,
The people we
You're
need,
you're good to go.
we're good to go,
Yeah.
in case I'm walking by. So just as we are,
find this one.
I'll look for it.
Yeah, the capital improvements are street systems, sewer systems, water, airport.
108 and
It's
one-
pretty, but it has auditoriums, arenas, so there's just a few things that are different there.
are there any further questions of, Mr. Lakefield? Steve?
Yes, one was just kind of clarifying this idea of what happens when the 40% NOS sales tax goes away. You've said, if I understand you, which I probably don't, that that'll go into flood control. Now, is that something because of a decision we've made, or is there some ordinance specifying that, or why?
It is set up in the ordinance, so when that NOS funding goes away, those other three buckets of that, in that penny, get increased proportionately. So
Okay.
some will go to flood control, some to property tax relief, and some to infrastructure.
So we could amend or we could pass a new ordinance, but the deal we made with everybody was that it would be proportionate distributed.
Yeah, and I would caution you from going back and redoing those ordinances, because
Their bonding makes you.
because their bonding is
Thank you.
dependent on that revenue stream.
Dave, can you tell us what, there's that bonding side, what would require going to the people?
For the sales tax,
Yep, for any changes to the pennies.
there isn't a requirement that it goes to a vote of the public.
Okay.
So historically, that's how the sales tax pennies came online, and some of the changes that were done along the way. But it's not a requirement that it go to a vote of the public.
Dave, with that, when the NOS project falls off, are they just going back to previous levels?
Yes. Yeah.
Dave, can you give me a number, roughly how much comes in to NOS with that percentage of the sales tax?
If we estimated 12 million, it'd be 4.8. We collected a little over 13 in 2023, so 5.2, 5.3 million.
Thank you.
Dave, can you talk a little bit about when some of that sales tax money was used to fund a community facility program? Because there's been a lot of talk and potential future political pressure that when NOS comes off is to restore that program and provide funding for community facilities within the community.
Yeah, it used to be that some years ago we had 30% of a penny dedicated to community facilities, and that was used to fund a number of things: turf at Corbett Field, softball complex, seating at MSU Dome. I think there was a project at Bishop Ryan High School. There was a number of projects throughout the city, maybe some Mesa or All Seasons Arena funding. When we redid the sales tax penny, that was eliminated, that community facilities money. And the driving force behind that is we knew, or we had a pretty good estimate of what flood control was going to cost, and we couldn't fund it at a half cent of sales tax. So we had to have the commitment or the ability. So part of that was we had to reallocate some of that sales tax to pay for flood control. And that was one of those decisions where the commitment had already been made to fund the local portion of flood control. And as we got going into this, we had some momentum with the state legislature to come up with the state dollars to pay for it, along with the NDR dollars. So it's kind of the strike while the iron's hot. The interest rates were favorable. Get as much of this built as we can. Now with interest rates rising, we're going to be more and more dependent on the state funding programs to help backfill that. So, yes, sir.
So not to put words in your mouth, but it's looked a little different at various times over the course. But the way it looks now is when NOS gets completed, with interest rates and inflation expenses on the project, whatever, it looks fairly likely that that portion of the sales tax will have to be dedicated to NOS as it was before.
Flood control, yes.
In other words, there isn't money to be used from that penny of sales tax for something else like law enforcement or whatever.
I think that's an accurate statement. I mean,
That-
it'll
that's
get
what
us
I
up
was-
to, it'll get us
That's what I
up
was
to,
getting, but I wanted to a little clarity.
it'll get us up to 80% of a penny to fund that. You know, if we're at $12 million, that's 9.6 million. I think we have about 130 million left to finance. So that starts to, you know, plus what we already have on the books. So, you know, and one of the things we run into when we use a volatile revenue source like that as a fund for a source of funding to repay bonds, they put a limit on there. So we have to have a coverage ratio of usually about 1.25. So meaning if we could pay for it at $10 million a year, they're going to make sure we have $12.5 million in revenue coming in every year, so that in case we have a light year with sales tax collection. So we start putting all those factors on there, and it really limits what we can finance with the limited revenue stream.
Well, what is more, you know, we found out a number of years ago what happens if there's a downturn in the economy, and all of a sudden that sales tax penny is only bringing in $8.5 million or whatever, and then where do you go for the needed money?
Yeah. So right now, the city of Minot has the best rate we can get with our bond rating for a city our size, which is important. And we've been pretty strategic about any debt that we've issued, knowing that we have these huge legacy projects that we have to finance. So we haven't issued any general obligation bonds or anything like that. It's those other types of things we've funded as we went. Knowing that that would be one of the things that would impact our bond rating is if we started taking on a bunch of additional debt, even if we could fund it from other sources, it's just like when you go to get a mortgage and you just bought a new car and a camper and everything else, a fishing boat, all of a sudden they look at you and say, well, you haven't missed a payment yet, but you have all this debt on the books, you're more of a risk. And, you know, just the downgrade in the rating means a higher interest rate. And if we even talk 25 or 50 basis points on $130 million for 40 years or 30 years, that's a lot of money. So we have to be pretty strategic about what we're doing with that. And, you know, we want to continue to have the highest rating we can get because that, again, is a penny saved, is a penny earned, right?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, Dave, so I think I figured out penny two and how that all falls back to that, and that one's pretty locked in once NOS goes, right? Then you'd have to do something through an ordinance change to change that one.
Mm-hmm.
In penny one, if I remember right now, again, there's one portion of that's labeled, I think it's like flood / economic development / something, there's one variable point in there. So there's the 50 flood, right? That's fully that. Is flood also a portion of one of the other slivers that's more variable like that? Did I catch that?
Yes, when the sales tax ordinances were redone here a while back, essentially flood control was written into just about all of the allocations as a potential use. So for sure the improvements in the infrastructure ones include flood control. I think they would meet the requirement to be included in infrastructure anyway as a definition. But economic development was also written into that. The flood control was written into the economic development portion as well. And it was one of those things where we were having all kinds of meetings and doing all kinds of models on how we were going to pay for flood control. And we were sitting on $8 or $9 million in the Magic Fund that wasn't being utilized. I think we went for over a year or maybe 2 years without having a request because the interest rate environment was so favorable on the market. You know, they didn't have to come to the Magic Fund to get money. So that was one of the criticisms that we had. It's kind of like the legacy fund at the state. We had this big pool of money that was sitting there. It wasn't even really earning much interest because the rates were so horrible. It was sitting there. So when we redid the ordinance, that was something that was written into there too, that if the economic development component went away, it could be utilized for flood control. Or if there wasn't, if we had funds that were available that weren't being utilized for something economic development related, they could be allocated towards flood control.
So off the top of your head across the two pennies, I think you just a second ago, now the number I have was 0.8 of the two essentially. Is there an upper end of that just through those allocations? And just another part of that, I think if I remember right, that's something you would propose to council as how to allocate that for a budget, is that right?
That would be part of the budget process.
Okay.
Because those portions of the penny are limited for those uses that are in the ordinance. Flood control is included in those uses. So when we go through the budget process, that is part of the budget process. Now keep in mind that we talked about water main replacements, street repairs and improvements. So it's all competing for those same funding sources. So in order to allocate all that money to flood control, we have to displace these other projects as well. So that's part of them.
So there is, really the point then there is a bunch of upside if all else didn't need to be done, but that's never the case. So
Exactly.
it's always gonna be competing interests, but just to get back to what we're worried about, which is, man, we're gonna run into a roadblock here with flood because we can't allocate our side enough. We do have more upside. And if the number you just said, if we were at about 13 on each of the pennies, so 26 this year, which is great, because I think we said 11 and a half was kind of the thought process, right? So that's upside, that's real good.
Mhm.
So there's actually a bunch of money there, but that doesn't mean it couldn't be used somewhere else even more effectively, maybe. But,
Yep.
okay.
The other thing about that, in a way, too, is that when we decision about, economic development, what got reduced was the amount going into the magic fund because of the large balance.
Yep.
So it wasn't that other economic development expenses increased by such a dramatic amount, but because of the large balance, there was a conscious decision to,
Slow the flow. a little bit.
tap
Yeah.
down what was going in there.
Yeah, makes sense.
See, there's one potential source of revenue we haven't really talked about, and that is user fees. And I know every year, Public Works comes up with a slightly revised schedule of what it costs to rent a payloader from us, things like that. And we've historically tried to keep user fees as low as possible. We've gone several years without any increases, and, I appreciate that's a political consideration by the administration, and, but I'm just wondering how much more headroom there is. I keep thinking, for example, of some of the department heads talking about what their budget is, and that part of that budget is, electricity, gas, IT services, whatever, and even legal services they're charged for. And I'm wondering if there's enough of that overhead, built into those fees. And the other question is, would there be any limitations on raising those beyond the cost of overhead, to help out with the situation, sort of like the reluctance to special assess people if it's a big fee, but if you spread these fees out all over the place, they might not be as painful to people. So what are your thoughts on that, Dave? Is there much room in terms of fees?
Alderman Patagula, I would say that there's always upside room, but it's a balancing act there too. You know, part of when we issue a building permit, the thought process is it covers some of the cost to go out there and do the inspections and those types of things. That isn't the only reason why we do that permitting process. It's a life, health, safety issue. We want to make sure that the construction is done the way it's supposed to.
And that's the primary reason.
And that's part of the government function, right? So now it's one of those things that depends on, that's always the balancing act where we're always told that we're not easy to do business with because we make people jump through all these hoops and we charge them a fee. But then as soon as something bad happens, who gets the finger pointed because we weren't out there babysitting the project all day long and those types of things. So it's always a balancing act where we're business friendly and able to do business with, but we're still taking care of those life, health, safety functions, and that's what the government's purpose is, right?
Do other cities use fees as more of a revenue generator? As a generator?
That's a difficult comparison to make. There's a wide variety of different fees and permits that folks charge, but I think they vary drastically across the board depending on who you're looking at. Last session, Bismarck implemented a utility fee to do street improvements and maintenance. So they are charging their utility customers a flat fee every month on their utility bill, and that money is going to do street repairs. They thought that was the avenue they wanted to go down, and it may work for them. That's a possibility, but there's a lot of inequities you have to balance out to go down that path also. So you trade what might be an advantage on one side, you trade something off on the other side of it too. So it just depends on where you want to go with that.
I guess one of the things that concern me, is that I think, regardless of the broader civic purpose, is that we need to cover our expenses. If we're delivering a service that doesn't cover our expenses, that's a problem. We're digging ourselves in a hole. And I think the thing that really set me off was, and this wasn't our fault, was the limitation the state placed on traffic tickets. And I looked at the recent chart, and I think it still costs us more to write a ticket just in terms of the officer's time on their computer and stopping the person than we get for like a 20 or a 10-mile-an-hour over speed limit. And I don't know, I think we're up at our limit from what the state sets for us for all municipalities. But that just seems so crazy that we can't charge what it costs us to deliver a service. Now, there's some service that should be free, charge for a fire truck to come and pump water to put the fire out your house, and that's morally wrong. But, you know, I guess that's something I think we need to take a look at, is at the very least, are we meeting the cost of providing the service? I know with trash, it's been an issue, and we wanted to keep the recycling fee very low because of political considerations, and that's legitimate. But I think that's one part that I think we need to look at and make sure that we're at least breaking even in most areas. And as for using it as a revenue generator, I guess, you know, it's grist for the mill. You know, we complain about people on a fixed income. Well, if you don't use a lot of services, that portion of your city revenues won't be that significant for you. So I guess I just like us as a group, you know, to kind of think that through a little bit more next time we look at fees. One of the thoughts I had actually was to require or ordinance require the city to raise the fees or change the fees, but it should always be raised in conjunction with the cost of living. I remember looking at one set of data for a 10-year period in the 2006 to 2016 timeframe. The cost of living, as federally determined, went up an average of 2% a year. City property taxes went up 1% a year. You know, we could argue about how much we should do for property taxes, but, you know, clearly on the face of it, on the surface of it, we're getting ourselves into a hole. And I just want to make sure the same thing doesn't happen with fees. So just wanted to say that.
Well, and as Dave says, I mean, there is some complications around that, right? So there's going to be some things that we provide that we're always going to subsidize. There's no way to charge enough fees to fully compensate for that. In the middle of that is, you know, take police services, for example, or fire services. The general public expectation and response is, well, that's what I pay property taxes for, right? And then you have some issues up on the top end of the spectrum where actually government does a good job and we can deliver that at a lower cost, but we're limited only to cost. So for example, we're limited by state law. So for example, let's take our nuisance issues as far as mowing lawns. We're cost effective enough that our costs are lower than what you would pay a private contractor to come mow your lawn. So when the public figures that out, yeah, the city can come knock on my door and tell me that they're going to mow my lawn, but the city's going to do it for $30 and I'm going to have to pay someone else $50. So I'm more than happy to let the city come out and mow my lawn because that's cheaper, right? But we're limited by state law that we have no wiggle room because we have to charge it for at cost. There is no penalty clause in there with regards to that. And that's some of the issues that we're running into with these nuisance properties. We have commercial properties in here that literally wait and tell us when we tell them, you need to mow your lawn, we're going to come out and mow it. Go ahead, because you do it cheaper than anyone else, right? All we want you to do is mow your lawn. We as the city do not want to have to come mow your lawn and use our time and resources to do that. We want you to mow your lawn. We want you to get a private contractor to come do that. But we do it cheaper, and state law doesn't allow me to, or allow us as the city to close that gap because we have to charge it at cost.
I guess
So,
maybe that's another item for lobbying.
yeah. So again, there's a difference of spectrum there. You're going to have things that you're never going to be able to get fully to cost. You're going to have things there in the middle that we probably do at cost, and then we have some things that we're actually more efficient at, and we get taken advantage of on that.
Well, thank you for reminding us that we can do things efficiently.
Yeah.
Okay, at this time, if there's nothing further for Dave, we can turn it over to Harold for your presentation.
Okay. So